What started as a narcotics operation became a fight for survival among cannibal tribes. 4 out of 9 soldiers survived. But the biggest secret wasn't Jake Rivers' identity. It was the true purpose of that operation. And Jake would sacrifice his career to keep it buried. Welcome to Storyline Universe. Before we dive into this intense story of survival, betrayal, and the price of keeping dangerous secrets, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about sacrifice and moral complexity deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. These moments define what we're willing to lose for the truth. Venezuelan jungle, 47 kilometers southwest of Puerto Ayacucho, September 15, 2023. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter cut through the dense canopy at 500 feet, its rotors chopping through humid air thick with moisture and the smell of decomposing vegetation. Inside, 9 soldiers sat in combat gear, checking weapons and reviewing intelligence photos one final time. Operation Green Sweep was supposed to be routine. Locate and destroy a major cocaine processing facility deep in the Venezuelan jungle, arrest key personnel, and extract intelligence on trafficking routes to the United States. Corporal Jake Rivers sat quietly near the rear of the aircraft, studying a map that showed more detail than the others carried. While his teammates focused on the drug lab, Jake's map marked additional coordinates, locations that weren't part of the official briefing. 5 minutes out, the pilot announced over the intercom. Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres, the team leader, stood and addressed his men. Remember, this is a joint operation with Venezuelan forces. We go in, neutralize the facility, collect intel, and get out. Clean and simple. Torres was a good soldier, 12 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments, solid tactical sense. But he didn't know what Jake knew. None of them did. The drug lab was real, but it wasn't the primary target. The real objective was buried in classified intelligence that only Jake had been briefed on. The facility was being used to test weaponized chemicals that could contaminate U.S. water supplies. The cocaine lab was a cover for a bioweapons research site funded by hostile foreign governments. Jake's real mission was to secure samples and destroy evidence before Torres's team could discover what they were really dealing with. Because if word got out that the U.S. had ignored a bioweapons facility for months while focusing on drug interdiction, it would trigger an international incident that could destabilize the entire region. "Rivers," Torres called out. "You're on overwatch. Find high ground and keep eyes on our perimeter." Jake nodded. It was the perfect assignment for what he really needed to do. 2 minutes later, the helicopter shuddered violently as ground fire erupted from the jungle below. The aircraft lurched, smoke began pouring from the engine compartment, and the pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Taking heavy fire, losing altitude, prepare for crash landing." The Black Hawk hit the canopy at 60 miles per hour, tearing through branches and vines before slamming into the forest floor with tremendous force. Jake felt his restraints cut into his chest as the aircraft rolled twice, then came to rest on its side against a massive cecropia tree. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake could hear groaning, the hiss of escaping fuel, and somewhere in the distance, voices speaking in a language that wasn't Spanish. Jake was the first to regain consciousness. His left shoulder throbbed, probably dislocated, and he could taste blood from where he'd bitten his tongue during impact. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was thinking clearly. The helicopter was a total loss. Twisted metal and shattered electronics scattered across 50 yards of jungle floor. Jake moved from soldier to soldier, checking for injuries and consciousness. Staff Sergeant Torres, unconscious but breathing, possible concussion. Specialist Rodriguez, conscious, broken ribs, moderate blood loss from facial lacerations. Private First Class Johnson, conscious, dislocated knee, cuts and bruises. Sergeant Williams, conscious, minor injuries. Corporal Mason, conscious, sprained wrist. Private Chen, unconscious, severe head trauma, critical condition. Private Thompson, conscious, punctured lung from broken rib. Specialist Davis, conscious, compound fracture of left arm. And Private Garcia, dead on impact, neck broken. 8 survivors out of 9. Jake quickly established that Torres would be unconscious for hours, leaving the team without official leadership at the worst possible time. "Rivers," Rodriguez called out. "What's the situation?" "Garcia's dead. Chen's critical. Torres is unconscious. We need to establish a perimeter and get our bearings." Jake began organizing the survivors, assigning security positions and medical priorities. It felt natural, but he was careful not to assume too much authority too quickly. These men knew him as a quiet specialist who followed orders and stayed out of the way. "Those voices we heard," Williams said, "they weren't our Venezuelan contacts." Jake had already identified the language. Yanomami, an indigenous dialect spoken by tribes in this region. Tribes that had a reputation for extreme violence and, according to some reports, cannibalism. "We need to move," Jake said. "This crash site will draw attention we don't want." "Move where?" Mason asked. "We don't even know where we are." Jake pulled out his map, the detailed one that showed his real objective. "I can get us to higher ground. Establish communications, call for extraction." It was a lie. Jake knew exactly where they were, and he knew that the nearest extraction point was 40 kilometers through hostile territory. But he also knew that 3 kilometers northeast was the real target facility, and he still had a mission to complete. What he didn't know was that they were being watched. The Yanomami hunting party had heard the helicopter crash and followed the smoke to investigate. To them, the aircraft was a metal bird that had fallen from the sky, carrying pale-skinned strangers into their ancestral territory. But these weren't ordinary Yanomami. This particular band had been driven deeper into the jungle by encroaching civilization, becoming more isolated, more territorial, and more violent. They had reverted to ancient practices that other tribes had abandoned decades ago, including ritual cannibalism. Jake spotted them first. 3 warriors moving through the jungle with primitive weapons but sophisticated hunting skills. They were tracking the soldiers, staying downwind, using the thick vegetation for concealment. "Contact," Jake whispered into his radio. "Indigenous hostiles, approximately 200 meters northeast." Torres was still unconscious. Rodriguez, as senior NCO, tried to take charge. "How many?" 3 visible, probably more. They're tracking us." "Rules of engagement." Jake hesitated. The official ROE for the mission was defensive only. Don't fire unless fired upon. But Jake knew something the others didn't. These tribes had been in contact with foreign operatives. The Bioweapons facility had been paying them to provide security and eliminate witnesses. "Defensive," Jake said finally, "but stay alert. These aren't curiosity seekers." The first attack came at dusk. Arrows began falling from the canopy, followed by spears thrown with deadly accuracy. Johnson took an arrow through his thigh, and Davis, already weakened by his broken arm, was struck in the chest. "Return fire," Rodriguez shouted. The soldiers responded with automatic weapons, but their attackers vanished into the jungle like ghosts. When the shooting stopped, Davis was dead, and Johnson was bleeding heavily. "Jesus Christ," Mason whispered. "What the hell was that?" Jake was moving among the wounded, applying pressure bandages and checking ammunition supplies. "We need to move, now. They'll be back with more people." "Move where?" Williams demanded. "We're lost in hostile territory with wounded men." That's when Torres finally regained consciousness, groggy but functional. "Report," he ordered. Rodriguez briefed him quickly. 2 dead, multiple wounded, under attack by indigenous forces, communications down, no extraction plan. Torres looked around the group, his eyes settling on Jake. "Rivers, you seem to have your head on straight. What's your assessment?" Jake had been dreading this moment. To save his team, he'd have to reveal more than he wanted to, but he couldn't let them all die to protect his cover. "Sir, we're approximately 40 clicks from any viable extraction point. Hostile forces know our position and have tactical advantage. We have limited ammunition, multiple wounded, and no air support. Options? We move northeast toward higher ground, try to establish communications, and hope the indigenous forces don't pursue us into disputed territory." It wasn't the full truth, but it was enough to get them moving in the right direction. What Jake didn't tell them was that disputed territory was controlled by a different kind of enemy entirely. Day 3 brought the first major fracture in group cohesion. They'd been moving slowly through dense jungle, carrying the wounded and trying to avoid contact with hunting parties that seemed to be tracking them constantly. Chen had died during the second night, bringing their number down to 6 survivors. Thompson, struggling with his punctured lung, finally collapsed during a river crossing. "I can't go any farther," he gasped. "Leave me behind." "Nobody gets left behind," Torres said firmly. But Mason disagreed. "We're all going to die if we keep moving this slow. Thompson's slowing us down. Johnson can barely walk, and we don't even know where we're going." Jake could see the group beginning to split along predictable lines. Torres, Rodriguez, and Williams wanted to stick together and help the wounded. Mason and Johnson, despite being wounded himself, wanted to move faster and leave the severely injured behind. "We stay together," Torres decided. "That's final." Mason stood up, shouldering his weapon. "Not me. I'm moving ahead, finding high ground, calling for extraction. Anyone who wants to live can follow me." Jake watched Mason walk into the jungle, knowing he'd be dead within 12 hours. The hunting parties had been herding them, channeling their movement toward a specific area. Mason was walking directly into a trap. But Jake couldn't explain how he knew that without revealing classified intelligence about the region. 6 hours later, they heard screaming from the direction Mason had gone. It lasted for almost 20 minutes before stopping abruptly. Day 5. 4 survivors: Torres, Rodriguez, Williams, and Jake. Johnson had died from infection, and Thompson had succumbed to his lung injury during the night. They'd found a defensible position on a ridge overlooking a valley, but their ammunition was nearly exhausted, and they hadn't eaten in 2 days. The hunting parties were getting bolder, closer, more aggressive. "Rivers," Torres said quietly, "I need to ask you something." Jake had been expecting this conversation. Torres was too good a soldier not to notice the inconsistencies. "You've been navigating like you know this terrain. You've anticipated enemy movements, And you've got intel none of the rest of us were briefed on. Who are you really? Jake looked at the 3 surviving members of his team, men who'd trusted him, followed him, stayed alive because of decisions he'd made. They deserved the truth, even if it killed them. My name is Jake Rivers, but I'm not a corporal. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jake Rivers, military intelligence. This wasn't a drug interdiction mission. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez was the first to speak. What the hell are you talking about? The facility we were supposed to hit isn't just processing cocaine. It's testing weaponized biological agents for use against U.S. water supplies. Foreign operatives have been using it as a bioweapons research site. And you knew this? Torres's voice was deadly quiet. I was sent to secure samples and destroy evidence before you could discover what was really there. The drug bust was a cover story. Williams stood up, his weapon moving toward Jake. You son of a bitch. You let our men die for a cover story? I let our men die because if word gets out about this facility, it triggers a war that kills thousands more. That wasn't your choice to make. Jake could see the group fracturing again. But this time the split was about him. Torres and Rodriguez looked betrayed but were still thinking tactically. Williams looked ready to shoot him. We can sort this out after we survive, Torres said finally. Right now, we need Rivers' intel to get out of here alive. But Jake knew they'd never make it 40 kilometers to extraction. Not with the hunting parties closing in, not with their ammunition nearly gone, not with the facility's security forces actively hunting them. There was only one way to save his team, and it would cost him everything. There's something else, Jake said quietly. About 3 clicks northeast is the Bioweapons facility. It has communications equipment, medical supplies, and a helicopter landing pad. So why didn't you mention this before? Rodriguez demanded. Because it's heavily defended, and approaching it will expose the real mission. But it's our only chance now. Torres studied Jake's face. What aren't you telling us? If we assault that facility, if we survive and extract, the entire operation becomes public. Congressional investigations, international tribunals, careers destroyed. The bioweapons program gets exposed, but so does everyone who knew about it. Including you. Including me. Jake pulled out a sealed packet from his gear, orders and intelligence summaries that proved the government had known about the bioweapons facility for months. Evidence that could destroy administrations and trigger international incidents. This is what I was really sent to secure. If this information becomes public, it destabilizes the entire region. But if we use the facility to escape, we can't hide what we found there. Williams lowered his weapon slightly. So what are you saying? I'm saying we assault the facility, destroy the bioweapons research, call for extraction, and get you home alive. And then I disappear so this never traces back to official U.S. operations. Torres understood immediately. You're talking about going rogue, destroying your career to protect classified operations. I'm talking about saving my team and accepting the consequences. The attack on the facility would require everything Jake had learned in 15 years of special operations. The 3 surviving members of his team would have to trust him completely, follow his lead without question, and never speak about what they found there. One more thing, Jake said. After we extract, you never saw me. Colonel Rivers died in the helicopter crash. The team was led by Staff Sergeant Torres, who showed exceptional leadership under impossible circumstances. Jake. That's how it has to be, for all of us. The bioweapons facility was disguised as a cocaine processing lab, but Jake could see the subtle differences. Too much security, too much electrical infrastructure, air filtration systems that didn't belong in a drug operation. They approached at dawn, using hunting party tactics they'd learned from being hunted. Jake's plan was surgical. Eliminate sentries silently, destroy research materials, secure communications, call for extraction. The first phase went perfectly. Jake moved like a ghost through the perimeter, neutralizing guards with techniques he'd learned in classified training programs. Torres, Rodriguez, and Williams followed his lead, trusting his expertise completely. Inside the main building, they found exactly what Jake had expected. Not cocaine processing equipment, but biological research laboratories filled with weaponized chemical agents designed to contaminate water supplies. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered. This stuff could kill millions. Jake was already placing demolition charges, following protocols for destroying biological weapons safely. 40 minutes to clear the area before detonation. Move. They secured the communications center and called for emergency extraction. Within minutes, they had confirmation. Rescue helicopter en route, ETA 1 hour. But as they prepared to evacuate, Williams made a discovery that changed everything. Jake, he called from a side office. You need to see this. The room contained files on other facilities. 12 locations across South America, all producing different types of biological weapons, all funded by hostile foreign governments, all ignored by U.S. intelligence agencies who were focused on drug interdiction. This isn't just one facility, Williams said. This is a network. Jake stared at the intelligence summaries, understanding the full scope of what they'd stumbled into. The bioweapons program was massive, multinational, and had been operating under the radar for years. We can't destroy this, Torres said. This intelligence could save thousands of lives. And if we take it, everyone who ever knew about this operation becomes a target for assassination, Jake replied, including your families. The sound of approaching helicopters forced a decision. Rescue was arriving, but so were hostile forces drawn by the explosions. Jake made the call. We take copies of the essential intelligence, destroy the rest, and never speak of this again. Torres, you discovered a biological weapons facility during your survival escape. You called for backup, destroyed the threat, and extracted with critical intelligence. What about you? I was never here.
The rescue operation was textbook perfect. 2 Black Hawks arrived with a full security element, extracted the survivors, and evacuated them to a secure medical facility in Colombia. During the flight, Jake briefed Torres on the cover story. Helicopter crash, survival in hostile territory, accidental discovery of bioweapons facility, successful destruction of threat. The intelligence you recovered will be credited to your leadership and tactical expertise, Jake said. You'll be recommended for promotion and commendation. And you, I'll be listed as killed in action during the helicopter crash. Body never recovered. Torres understood. Jake was erasing himself from the official record to protect everyone involved. The bioweapons intelligence would surface through proper channels, attributed to Torres's team, investigated by appropriate authorities. Jake Rivers, Lieutenant Colonel, Military Intelligence, would disappear. Why? Rodriguez asked quietly. Why sacrifice everything for us? Jake thought about the question as the Colombian coast appeared below them, because some secrets are more dangerous than the truth. And because good soldiers don't leave their team behind, even when staying with them costs everything. The helicopter landed at the U.S. facility in Cartagena. Jake shook hands with each survivor, wished them well, and walked away into the night. He never saw any of them again. The official report listed Lieutenant Colonel Jake Rivers as killed in action during a helicopter crash in Venezuelan airspace. His body was never recovered due to hostile territory and weather conditions. Staff Sergeant Torres was promoted to Sergeant First Class and received the Bronze Star for leadership during survival operations and discovery of biological weapons threat. The intelligence recovered from the facility led to the dismantling of 12 bioweapon sites across South America, preventing potential attacks on U.S. water supplies that could have killed hundreds of thousands of people. Congressional oversight committees reviewed the operation and found that all actions taken were appropriate and within legal guidelines. No further investigation was warranted. But Torres, Rodriguez, and Williams never spoke about what really happened in the Venezuelan jungle. They carried the secret of Jake Rivers' sacrifice, his true mission, and the price he'd paid to protect them and their country. 6 months later, a man who looked remarkably like Jake Rivers was teaching survival skills to civilians in the mountains of Montana. He used a different name, carried different identification, and never discussed his military background. Sometimes, hikers would comment on his expertise, his knowledge of tactics, his leadership abilities. He would smile and change the subject. Torres tried to find him once, using official channels and personal contacts. The search led nowhere. Jake Rivers had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed, which, according to official records, he hadn't. The bioweapons network was completely dismantled. The intelligence that Torres's team had discovered led to arrests, prosecution, and international cooperation agreements that strengthened biological weapons treaties worldwide. Thousands of lives were saved by intelligence, attributed to the heroic actions of Staff Sergeant Torres and his team during their survival ordeal in Venezuelan territory. And somewhere in the Montana wilderness, a man who'd once been Lieutenant Colonel Jake Rivers continued serving his country in the only way he could, by staying invisible, keeping secrets, and never seeking recognition for the sacrifices he'd made. 5 years later, Torres received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a wilderness guide in Montana who'd led a successful rescue operation after a hiking accident, saving 6 people who would have died from exposure. The guide's name was different, but Torres recognized him immediately from the small photograph. There was no note, no explanation, just the clipping. But Torres understood the message. Jake Rivers was still out there, still serving, still saving lives in ways that would never make official records. Some heroes get medals and parades, others get classified files and congressional hearings, and some heroes get something more important: the knowledge that they saved lives by giving up everything they were to protect everyone they cared about. So now, I ask you, have you ever known someone who sacrificed everything for others without seeking recognition? Have you met people who carry burdens they can never share to protect the ones they love? Share their story in the comments, not their secrets, just their strength. Because here at Storyline Universe, we believe that the greatest acts of service are often the ones that go unrecorded, performed by people who choose duty over recognition, sacrifice over reward, and silence over glory. Thank you for watching. If this story of hidden sacrifice and moral complexity moved you, subscribe to Storyline Universe. We're here to remind you that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is disappear so others can be remembered.